some questions that were intended to stimulate deeper thinking and critical practices through the maker processes that CS educators might actually be able to use in their classroom. So the questions are, what will make me happy? Who is my audience? What resources do I have and need? What will inspire me to give my time and effort to a project? What do I know? Can I let myself make a mistake? How will my creation affect other people? And what kind of maker am I? Okay, so let's kind of unpack each one of those, both in terms of what the authors have for implications and then how this might relate to computer science education. So the first one, what will make me happy? According to the teens in the study, the heart of making processes is having fun or engaging in some kind of a pleasurable experience related to making within that space. So that is something that I really tried to focus on in the classes that I was working with. So the K-8 coding classes that I designed and facilitated in Avondale, Arizona, They were mandated by all of the kids in the school. So several hundred kids were forced to be in a classroom that they may or may not have an interest in. So my goal was to try and find some way to make this process an engaging and fun experience for everybody who was required to be there. Now, this is an approach that I've mentioned before in interviews that is different than how I might approach a class where kids are opting to be there. So like when I have facilitated elective courses or even graduate courses at the university level where people are paying to be there, I know there's some kind of a buy-in inherently with either the course topic itself or the broader degree topic as a whole. So I don't have to think about this as much as a course that is forced on a kid who might not have any kind of interest in computer science or coding to begin with. Now, the second question, who is my audience? So I think this is an excellent question to think through to kind of get at some of the standards, like the CSTA's standards or even ISTE's standards, that are on thinking through diverse perspectives and end users when creating or making some kind of a product or artistic expression. So for example, thinking through how someone who is deaf might engage with a project that has a lot of sounds or music. Now the next question, what resources do I have and need? So this is a good question to think through in terms of like the constraints are important to consider, like what kind of resources do I have and am I limited to? So if I want to be able to create A, B, and C, but I only have X, Y, and Z for resources, I might not be able to do that. But this is also kind of a good way of thinking through inspiration. So here's a quote from page 121. It says, quote, as one teen explained, one of her first actions when launching a maker project is to look around the space and ask herself, what can I use to inspire me? End quote. So I think that's a really good way of kind of framing this in terms of affordances. Like, what can this do for me? And how might I create something that's interesting to me using the resources that I have available to me? Now, from a computer science perspective, the resources might not just be the physical hardware that you're using within a class, as is typical of many makerspaces in terms of like what kind of tools do I have and resources can I make, but also the software. So thinking through, well, what kind of platforms do I have? What kind of languages do I have? And several of the past interviews on this podcast have kind of talked through that. In particular, the interview with John Stapleton kind of unpacks affordances and constraints a bit more. So the next question is, what will inspire me to give my time and effort to a project? Here's a quote from page 121. Makers assess the value of a project according to the balance between their knowledge and skills and the degree of meaningfulness that the project has for them. Too much interest coupled with too little knowledge might mean extra time and effort. But if the project is interesting enough, time and effort might be worth it. By asking this question, one begins to plan for engagement in the making process. End quote. Now, I think this is a really good point to take into consideration. This kind of builds off of Vygotsky's zone of proximal development or Csikszentmihalyi's idea of flow and other people who've kind of talked about things in different ways. The idea that your level of effort and energy and time that you can put into something needs to be balanced with your current abilities and how difficult it is to complete what you're working on. Having had a lot of experiences in different subject areas with this particular topic, I will say that I strongly recommend people engage in what they're interested in, even if it is more difficult than what they are currently capable of doing at the moment in terms of skills or abilities. So, for example, when I worked with young musicians who were working on a piece of music that was very difficult for them, but if they're super motivated to learn that piece of music, like they just love that piece of music, and it's like, yeah, great, we'll just go really slow, and as long as you're okay with that, then I will help you through that. However, if they really liked a piece, but they weren't willing to put in the time to work on it because it was too difficult for them, then I usually say, well, here's how much time it's going to take to be able to play that thing really well. Are you willing to invest that amount of time into it? And then often people would say, no, let's work on something easier. So basically what I'm saying is it might help to kind of have kids think through whether or not their level of inspiration to work on something kind of matches the amount of time they're willing to put into a project or able to put into a project.
This excerpt was from podcast number 14, which is titled Mindful Makers, Question Prompts to Help Guide Young People's Critical Technical Practices. And you can listen to this episode and hundreds more at jaredoleary.com or by simply searching for the CSK8 podcast on your favorite podcast app.